I assume there are no apologies for absence. Is that correct? The first thing is declarations of interest. My only declaration is I am in receipt. Anyone listening doesn't know, I'm Councillor Charles Williams. I'm chairman of the pension board, and I would add that I am also in receipt of a small pension from the council's pension scheme. Does anyone else have an interest to declare? Right, I think I'll just say this. I don't feel you need to cut your video out unless you wish to, but obviously it's probably helpful to mute if you're not speaking to avoid extraneous noise. So the first item is the minutes of the, not this committee, yes, the minutes of the pension board held on the 22nd of July. Do you agree that I should sign those as an accurate record? Is that agreed? Yes. So if right, everyone's nodding.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you very much.
Agreed.
I think any matters arising probably will crop up elsewhere anyway. So I'll next turn to the meeting of the pension board. There have been two meetings since we last met. They brought their, my hope had been that our meeting would, this meeting would precede the next investment committee. And in fact, they brought their meetings forward, so there have been two. And in fact, I think it worked out quite well. So I will give an oral report on that meeting, which I attended, where we come to where it's relevant. But if we can go first through the investment committee's last September meeting. Some of these are matters which are on our agenda anyway. I think the things I want to comment on in particular are, well, one thing in particular, which was, well, two things. Firstly, was the item under A8, where I took this, the issue we discussed at our last meeting, to the investment committee, and they, as I say, we got a response. Now, does anyone have any questions about what their response was? I will say that we didn't discuss at that point specifically the concerns were expressed about property, and therefore I'm going to suggest that we have a discussion about property strategy later, and I think we'll probably have to do some of that in part B. Right. Any sort of questions about that particular item, or anything else arising from that meeting of the investment committee? No. I mean, I will say this, that on both this occasion, more so the meeting last week, I mean, the co-opted members who are new are really beginning to be, I think, in my view, proving very useful. And they've also, as you say, filled the vacancies on the SIV, which I think is good. Right. Officers, do you have any comments to make on investment committee meeting minutes from the September meeting? No?
I don't, Councillor.
Sorry?
It's Andy. I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Fine. Right. So the next item is number A5, which is the risk. Yes, the risk register, risk management. So would somebody like to introduce that?
Yes, Chair, I can do that. So, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, hope you're all well.
Yep.
So this is just to introduce the risk register. Hopefully it's got the accompanying governance and pension administration Excel sheets. So as you're all aware, that the board holds primary oversight and responsibility of the risk register. So this is just the opportunity to review and make any comments and amendments as necessary. I think we made a few minor amendments at the last meeting, which is why you'll see an update as at the 22nd of July. And if there's anything else anyone else would like to add.
Yes, I actually have, well, one governance question. You said the board has prime responsibility for risk, the risk register. What are the responsibilities of the investment committee in respect to the risk register? Because they've rather sort of delegated it to us or passed it up to us. And I just wondered what the formal position is.
Sure.
Yes, Chair, it is a slightly grey area in terms of delegation of responsibilities. We do take a full risk register to the committee each time. So there is that scrutiny that takes place at that forum. But in terms of official responsibilities, I would say it's for both entities to have a good study.
Right. I mean, I think the position is certainly the legislation is slightly indistinct, but I mean, my understanding is that we have certainly said we will take responsibility for the oversight, including, of course, risk management of pension administration. The investment committee will obviously do what they always done and what they're good at, which is investment or overseeing investment. But they will that obviously has a risk aspect to it, as this is abundantly clear. I had actually one very specific question, which was a few days ago I attended a webinar organised by Aegon about cybercrime and local authority pension schemes. Now, I mean, much of what was discussed were risks facing the council or councils anyway, and we obviously there are certain risks which we have to manage in respect of the services provided by Surrey, which will obviously change when that comes in-house, and I would say that should lead to a reduction or better management of risk. But the particular issue I wanted to raise was that they said, look at the data flows, and are there any risks associated to data flows in respect of pension administration, which really are not captured elsewhere by the council's systems and risk management procedures. So that is my question.
I think so. Chair, it's David Coates here. In terms of data flows, the information that it flows between Hampshire County Council and.
Sorry, I just need to turn this over. I do apologise. Sorry about that. Yeah.
It's okay. So most of the information on active members comes from Hampshire County Council and is sent to Surrey securely, and that will continue to be the case from the 1st of April next year, when it's sent to us things like starters, changes and leaver information. The only other major data flows that occur between the parties involved in terms of the employers and the scheme administrators is really with third parties, so schools and their payroll providers and academies. So we do receive information annually and monthly from all of those bodies. The majority of it is sent securely from those bodies to us via secure email, so it's encrypted. Where it doesn't come in securely, they just send it on a normal email. Then we do ask them to encrypt going forwards. So I think we've only got a couple of bodies now that send unsecure, and we keep reminding them to send that. So what they have to do is put the word encrypted in the title of the email, and then it comes over encrypted. From next year, from April 2021, when we take over the service from Surrey, what will happen is that we will be phasing in during the course of that year the iConnect system, which will force all employers and all scheme employers to basically send information in securely by logging into a portal that we will have using a software system called iConnect. So the intention is that going forwards from 2021 to 22 financial year, we will be making sure that every communication that comes into us in terms of containing member information is forced down that route. So I think the bottom line is that there are a few gaps at the moment, but they are being plugged.
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, that's a very positive story, and yes, I mean, I think you should consider whether that should be mentioned as a specific risk, and it should be reviewed from time to time, because obviously the environment can change, but without duplicating obviously the risk management procedures elsewhere.
Noted.
Yes, I think it's a good idea to actually have it listed as a risk. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. Any other comments about the or questions about the risk register?
Chairman, my hand is up, but if I may, I've got one general point and then about 4 detailed questions. The general point is this risk assessment, this risk analysis with the traffic lights, red, green, yellow, etc., etc. That appears to it's undated, but looking at A10, which we're going to do later anyway, under A10, an identical risk analysis is presented on page 78, 79 onwards. But in there, it says it's part of the financial statements for the year ending 31st of March 2020. But all these risk points are dated 22nd of July 2020. But the headings on page 79 and 78 say annual accounts 2018-19. So I'm quite confused about, I suspect it's iterations. You know, it's been progressive updatings of the same risk register. But under A10, I would like to raise the dating of 31st of March, and then accounts 18-19, and then the date of the 22nd of July 2020. So that I'll raise that under A10 a bit later.
Thank you.
But assuming that here now, back to this risk register is all for the 22nd of July 2020, on the first page, on the 6th row, there's a risk of loss of funds through fraud or misappropriation, which only has a likelihood of 2, and I just thought that was a bit high. That you know, it's not sort of rock bottom, a likelihood of 1. So I just wondered why we think fraud has a likelihood of 2.
Could I have a response to that, please?
Yes, Chairman, these are entirely subjective scores, and they are scores that are submitted by officers in consultation with the industry and journalists. So in terms of a likelihood, I mean, obviously, a 1 is least likely, a 5 is most likely. 2 is obviously just above 1. It's not unheard of in local government for fraud to take place. And there have been documented cases in the past where perpetrators have been sentenced to long terms of imprisonment. So it's something that does happen occasionally. Obviously, the mitigating factors here are the internal controls in any system that will act against such poor practice in terms of error, and then obviously on the fraud side as well. So the system is as good as its internal controls for avoiding this type of event. And our officers' views is that across the Tri-Borough and especially at RBKC, those internal controls have been well placed and are acting as they should. But if it's members' views that that score should be changed, we are very happy to do that.
Well, I mean, you've got me to exactly the point of the question. If we're rating it as a likelihood of 2, I think it's our job to point out that somebody should look at that and investigate what the weakness is in terms of likelihood of fraud and do something about improving it so we move it towards a 1. And so it's to ask, you know, what is the potential source of fraud? Can we look at that and have a report back on it at a subsequent meeting? Because a 2 is obviously more worrying than a 1. And then on the next page, there are some 3s. So on the next page, there's a 3 on reconciliation leads to incorrect contributions. And I wonder if the likelihood of that, if we can see that reducing in future for reasons that, you know, we discussed privately. And also bank reconciliations are undertaken by the pensions finance team. And of course, it says that's just been brought in highest, but it still has a likelihood of 3 of going wrong. And finally, the one down at the 2/3 of the way down, failure of administration system resulting in loss of records, again, has a likelihood of 3. So I think all those points we would like to hear what has been done about decreasing the likelihood of those risks actually occurring. Then on the next page, there's actually a 4. It's the only one that's got a 4. And it relates to COVID impacting stock markets. And that's a likelihood of 4. Well, I think that's probably a likelihood of 5. I think it has happened, although it is recovering slowly. And of course, there's some 3s down there, volatility of markets following disruptive politically inspired events. I just wondered why they are highly likely to disrupt our pension fund investments. And then there's another 3 about price inflation is more than anticipated. I'm nearly there, Chairman. Sorry. There's another 3 on the next page under governance. Proposed changes to the pooling does not conform to plan or cannot be achieved. That's a risk of 3. And finally, there's 3 other quick ones. On the next page, there's a 2, impact of increases to employer contribution following the valuation. Well, as I understood it, the valuation was that we're still in a strong position, and I think we have a 13% employer's contribution. So I'm not sure if that still is at risk and that we may have to increase that. And then finally, on the penultimate page, there's a risk of a change of government may result in new wealth sharing policies. I just wonder what that refers to. And then there's about 2/3 of the way down the page, another risk that markets fail to perform in line with expectation and therefore increase contribution requirements from employers. I just wonder if that's only employers or could it be employees as well? So those are my points. Sorry, it's a bit laboured, but I finished. I don't expect immediate answers, but I hope that somebody could look into those points if those are real risks.
If I could just clarify a few minor things. So in relation to some of the risks, so for instance, the fraud, I think there is the mitigation. So it was admin item 6. So, for example, the mitigating actions that have been put in place will put the revised likelihood at a 1. So, in fact, that will be at a 1 when you look at the revised likelihood. And in terms of questioning about the dates, the 22nd of July on the annual reports is because we had the pension board meeting after the 31st of March 2020 when the accounts were up to. These have been put in as an appendix at the end, as they're required as part of the annual reports. But because some of them had been updated, we didn't want to put outdated risk register as part of the annual report. So an updated appendices went into the annual report so that we wasn't providing outdated information.
Yeah, just in support of that, Chairman, the mitigating factors will always, well, in most cases, will reduce the likelihood. So you see a net position once those mitigating factors are taken into account. It does reduce the likelihood. So that's the right-hand side of the chart. We also have the good work of internal audit, who will do an annual assessment and report on the pension system as a whole. Obviously including the investment process and the administration process. And obviously with the pension fund being a high value and a high risk area, the frequency of the audit is substantial. So we get an assessment at least once a year and a report consisting of numerous recommendations for tightening up on existing controls and introducing new ones. So that would alleviate a lot of the risks on the administration side.
Thank you. I mean, I'll just make sort of 2 observations. One is obviously that what this does is I mean, one can argue about the likelihood, but it identifies key risks and states the measures being taken to mitigate those risks. We can't eliminate those risks. And obviously we could make a judgment that those are inadequate if we did. My other point was really going back to what I said earlier, is that, I mean, some of these are very much investment risks, and that the things that the investment committee in its investment strategy needs to consider. So any other further points? Right. Okay. Well, I think that is. So we have reviewed and commented as we were asked to do. So we now move on to, if that's all right, we move on to item A7. Do you want to take that with AAH at the same time or separately?
I can do it separately, Chairman.
Okay, right. Okay.
Are we going to jump A6, Chairman?
I do apologise. No, I do apologise because there's no paper on direct property investment. Am I correct? There's no paper on direct property investment.
There should be one.
Oh well,
I'm happy to. It's a very short one. It's a brief.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I apologise. Yes, it's quite short, as you say. I overlooked it. Yeah. Yes, if I'd like to have a discussion in Part B about property as well. So if you'd like to just comment on this in general terms.
Sure. So this is, as I say, very top level, just to say that, as I'm sure the board is aware, that the pension fund acquired its first direct property at the end of March 2020. So this just updates the board on the current status of those tenants' payments. All 3 tenants are still trading, and they have been since the middle of June. After conversations, one of the tenants has extended their lease. And as at June 2020, we have 75% of rent collected, and the fund manager, CBRE, are continuing to collect and chase the outstanding rent. But the government currently have made it clear that there's no forceful measures that can be implemented to pursue any type of eviction process. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from them in the coming months. But as at yet, nothing can be done until the end of 2020. But as I say, the fund managers will be pursuing anything outstanding, and any questions can be raised here. But as the chair says, I think we'll have a longer discussion in Part B.
Thank you very much. Any points at this stage?
Chairman, I'm very conscious of not mentioning anything which is commercially confidential, but I just wanted to note on this report that the investment strategy says we're aiming for a 20% of the portfolio to be property based, and the actual achievement so far, this 25 million, it represents 2.2%, and so I thought that if that's correct, correct me if I'm wrong, officers, but I think we ought to note that you know, out of a target of 20% investment, we're at 2.2% at the moment.
That's correct.
Yes, agreed, Chairman. This is a slow burn strategy. The intention of the committee is to get up to 20% of the entire portfolio in property, with around a maximum of 20 properties. Obviously, it takes time to identify those as suitable for acquisition, and they're done on a case-by-case basis. We are on the 3rd one at the moment, which is something I wouldn't be able to discuss until it's in Part B, but that is a 3rd property that's underway as we speak. But the expected timeline to get up to 20 properties, I would imagine, are being a maximum of 3 years.
Thank you. You happy with that, Councillor Spalding?
Yep, thank you, Chairman.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay, as I say, we will have a further discussion later. Item A7 then.
Thank you, Chair. This is the paper that sets out the Supreme Court decision, which is a groundbreaking decision that was reached earlier this year by the Supreme Court. It concerns the right of an investment committee to approve its own policies in terms of the investment process. And the challenge resulted from a government statutory guidelines paper, which stipulated that pension policies should not pursue boycotts, divestment and sanctions against foreign nations, and should not pursue policies that are contrary to UK foreign policy or UK defence policy. Now, that was appealed, that local authority administering authorities for pension funds should have the right to pursue their own investment policies. And to the government's surprise, and by a majority verdict of 3-2, the Supreme Court ruled in favour of the challenge, that the authorities should have their own direction in the investment policies that they pursue. And I think the crux of the matter is set out in paragraph 2.2, which is the statement of Lord Wilson, who said that irrespective of whether misconception to which I referred played a part in leading the Secretary of State to to include in the guidance the 2 passages on the challenge. I conclude that his inclusion of them went beyond his powers. How does not include what? So what the crux of the decision is that it's not for government to specify what investments are followed in the investment policy, but they can advise as to how those decisions are reached by the investment committees. So the paper looks at implications for LGPS funds. That's in paragraph 3 onwards. We could expect to see an increase in correspondence from the various campaign groups who like to see their local authority funds follow a particular ethical stance or particular direction, where particular types of investments are ruled in or ruled out, and climate change is a good example of that, and the oil companies and other industrial policies that have resulted in impacts on climate change. I think what will happen in future is the government, instead of issuing statutory guidance, if they want to stipulate as to particular ways in which administering authorities carry out their business, there is the need to pass secondary legislation which puts that particular matter, whatever it might be, puts it into statutory law as opposed to statutory guidance, where there's something a bit more of a, in terms of the authorities being able to act on their own discretion. If the matter is important enough to the government, it will need to be in legislation. So happy to take any questions on that, Chairman.
Yes, I mean, you said you thought there might be more sort of people, might be pensioners, might be members of the public, might be councillors sort of writing and saying, well, we should or shouldn't invest in this. At the moment, I think those if it is those replies are really come from the chairman of the investment committee. Is that correct? I mean, that ultimately it is the investment committee which decides on investment policy, not the pension board. Therefore, the investment committee and its chairman are responsible for responding to any such correspondence that is passed up to them.
Yes, and most of the time, Chairman, if we get correspondence from members of the public or various pressure groups, the officers will deal with that in terms of a response, and most of the time it doesn't go as far as the investment committee.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are ways in which pressure groups can send emails on behalf of residents to their councillors. I've had this for other groups. I mean, you just have to say to this group, yes, I'd be happy for you to use my email, and off it goes. So I mean, that is what we might or we might not see more of. So as I say, I just wanted to understand what the procedure is. Yeah.
And the other implication for this, Chairman, is with regard to pooling. So it does have an impact on the future of pooling. Where, as I say, statutory guidance was the way in which government direction was published and expected to be followed. Again, it will be for the government to introduce secondary legislation to ensure that their wishes for the future of pooling are followed, as opposed to putting them in guidance papers. So that it has changed the whole way in which the future of pooling will be implemented.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Now we move on to A8.
So thank you, Chairman. Mcleod will be a common term that I would say all members and officers will have heard at some point over the last 2 or 3 years. Mcleod is a High Court judge. Her name is actually Victoria Mcleod. I think she was one of the youngest High Court judges appointed in recent years. And it was her appeal to a tribunal some years ago on the basis that her changes to her pension plan, which was the High Court scheme, which followed the same lines as LGPS. Actually, it moved from a final salary scheme to a career average revalued earnings. So from final salary to care, was basically harmed her rights in terms of age discrimination. So the factor where age discrimination came in was the tapering of, I think there was a 10-year lead-in time, so that the impact of the change from final salary to career average wasn't a big hit, that it would be tapered in to 10 years. So if you were 10 years within your retirement, then there was a tapering effect for that change. Now, what Victoria Mcleod argued that was such a tapering process was discriminatory for on grounds of age to the people who didn't benefit from the taper. So this was something that was anticipated at the time by I think one of the I can't remember his name. It was Lord Hutton. Lord Hutton introduced this review, and he did pick up on this tapering that was implemented by the government, and said you could get a problem with that down the line if because there is a possibility it could be regarded as discriminatory. And his advice was ignored, and the government proceeded. Now, it took that appeal for the government to go as far as the Supreme Court. They didn't actually take it to the Supreme Court. They allowed the appeal, and the Mcleod judgment, as it became known, has had a massive impact. Now, this paper talks about the way that the government was trying to get around this and put things right. The solution to the problem, which is basically to put some form of underpin into the framework, such that no individual is has any harmful effect of this tapered ruling. So basically, it means whatever if an individual is approaching retirement, then the statutory underpin consists of a check as to whether that individual would be better off either with the career average implementation or going back to the final salary. So this statutory underpin goes, has been put forward as a proposal. There is a consultation process underway as we speak, and the underpin will last up to, I think it's 1st of April 2022. So that is that's the thrust of this paper. Just to emphasise that it is extremely complicated. I think Mr. Coates in this meeting will agree that there's a massive workload in the future for administration staff when people are getting their retirement quotes and having to make these comparisons for final salary or career average. It's a very, very complicated process, and there will be implications in terms of future cost of administration and the resources that are required to implement it.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, my recollection is that when you discussed this with the investment committee, you said basically because we're in a strong position, it's in terms of the cost of the scheme, it's sort of something we can live with.
Yes, and the actuary, Chairman, made sure that in his calculations for the 2019 valuation, Mcleod in the pipeline was known about. So the actuary made sure that the cost of a future Mcleod solution would be inbuilt to his calculations, and those calculations have been proven to be reasonably accurate, and therefore the current contribution rates do take account of this cost.
But actually, like you, Mr. Triggs, I can see that the worry for us is probably more about the administrative aspect, and particularly I think there's also a concern where it's an outside employer, scheduled or admitted body, and the record might be incomplete. I mean, that I fear is something which could be rather troubling. Did Mr. Coates want to say anything about that?
Yes, Chairman, I think you're right about that. There will be some gaps in scheme member data, particularly from employers that are external employers. We have done quite a lot of work over the last year and a half to rebuild the archive of member records that we have here going back to 2015. Which is the earliest that our records go back in terms of monthly contributions data coming in from all the external employers. Having said that, even if you look at the historic data that we have here, there will still be gaps of information that Phil Triggs has alluded to, that we will still need to go back to external employers to obtain missing information. So things like, for example, the contractual hours the person worked, per week, their term time percentage if they're working term time, that sort of thing. So yes, I think it will be a massive exercise. Some of that will be offset by the records that we have here, but a fair proportion of it won't be. And I think that we will have to go back to almost all external employers to obtain missing information.
I mean, I can think particularly in schools, there will be people whose contractual hours have varied quite a lot during their period of employment. And I think that's probably going to be more of a characteristic than perhaps people who are directly employed by the council in sort of percentage terms.
Yes, that's correct. And I think that on top of that, we have the added complication of the fact that some of those people will have multiple concurrent employments. And we will be heavily reliant on the good record keeping of Surrey and of those external employers to make sure that they have disaggregated all individual employments for any one single member of staff. So yes, it will be quite a mammoth exercise. We're not starting it yet. I think it's something that we will be looking at once we take over the service. We have had a number of regular discussions with Surrey about Mcleod and the implications, and they're in a similar position. They haven't really started any work yet to determine what they have to do to get information. I think we're just waiting for a little while longer to see how the landscape shifts and whether there are any developments nationally before we decide how to proceed with getting information that we think is missing.
Thank you. Any questions on this, other members? Well, I'm afraid we'll be hearing more about this, and particularly I think the administrative challenges of this decision. Before we leave this subject, can I mention something I read about in the Financial Times, which I don't understand whether it affects local government schemes or not, which is a recent court judgment over the way that GMP is calculated. Does that affect local government pension schemes?
Yes, it does. So a number of members, a number of pensioners and members will have there will be GMP implications in terms of making sure that the GMP value is up to date on their record. We've had a number of, again, as part of the transfer of the service, we've had a number of discussions with Surrey about the way in which they hold GMP information on the current system. We've identified that they don't currently hold GMP as a separate value for the purposes of the pension increase. So one of the things that we're doing as part of the transfer from Surrey is to disaggregate the GMP value for the purposes of the annual pension increase so that it is held as a separate value. There is additional work going on that Surrey are doing at the moment with the National Insurance Contributions Office and also with HMRC in terms of making sure that GMP values are up to date on records. We think that that work will still continue into next year. It will be helped by the fact that we're looking to disaggregate the GMP value that's held on the system from basic pension. But I think the full scope of the work that's outstanding on that will still really not be known until probably April or May next year.
Thank you very much. Right, Mr. Triggs, any comment on that or no?
Happy with that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Okay. Well, we will be hearing more about both items, GMP and Mcleod, in the future, I'm sure. If we can move on to paper A9. Who would like to introduce that? Mr. Triggs?
I think Julia is going to take this one, Julia.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Oh, you're on mute, Julia.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. So this report is just reviewing the rebalanced investment asset allocation. And as you are probably aware, this is broken down by the individual fund managers and across the different categories. So the investment committee met in September, 28th of September, and they've agreed and signed off on the revised asset allocations. So the table below that you should have in your report details these allocations. And I think most of them you'd probably be aware of, and as mentioned, the direct property at 20%, which was agreed quite a while ago. But this is just to put it formally into a report which the committee signed off and is now going to be reported against in terms of performance. Just to note a few things, that the liquidation of Absolute Return Fund Manager Perford completed in June, and that's reflected in the target allocations. The wind down of CBRE, which is the Pooled Property Fund, so that's at 0%. There's a 2.5% increase on the Elgin Rafi Fund, and the allocation of property assets is now at 20%. So if anyone has any comments or anything, happy to take any questions.
I don't have any comments or questions. No. Right. Thank you very much. And then now we move on to the annual report and financial statements A10, which we have seen before. We are not asked to do anything other than to note. Do any officer have any comments to add to this?
Only that it's been in front of the investment committee, Chairman, and received that level of scrutiny. Councillor Marshall did make quite a few requests for various edits, which we've implemented.
That's right. Okay. Any questions?
Chairman, just my observation that the front page says annual report and accounts 31st of March 2020 for the year ended March 2020, but all the way through the right-hand borders, which are a sort of heading, say annual report 1819.
That's the header in the.
Yes, on every single page, the right-hand margin.
Yes, or that. Yes, it's a header really. I think. Anyway, yeah, yes.
I think that's just a slight oversight on the header, but it is a 1920, and we can rectify that, and we can have the updated version, which will be publicly available online at the end of this week.
And then finally, if it is supposed to be, like an annual accounts and report, it's supposed to be a snapshot on the date at the year end. It's odd that all the risks have then been updated, because they should have been a snapshot of the risks at the year end in March 2020.
Yes, I would agree with that, Chairman. As the member says, this is a snapshot as at 31st of March 2020. So anything beyond that date you would not expect to see within the narratives. So I will get Julia to update that to take it back to 31st of March position.
Have the accounts actually been signed yet?
There is delegated authority, Chairman, for any edits that are required for myself to approve those.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, that's noted. We go on to A11, which is the pension administration update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this report is an update to the board on what I've considered to be key pension administration issues, where in the past performance mostly from Surrey has been varied. So I think the overall position is one of gradual improvement, but in some areas the improvement has been very good, and in other areas it's been minimal. So as we go through the report, I'll point out where that is the case. So in section 2.1, I've listed 6 areas where in the past we've had varied performance in terms of performance, mostly from Surrey. So section 3, first of all, is about scheme member data. So board members will probably be aware that every year we have an assessment that's required for what we call common and conditional data scores. So this is where the pension software supplier Haywood run a series of analyses of scheme data held on the Surrey system to determine whether it meets what are called common and conditional scores as set out by the pension regulator. So in section 3.3, you can see there that according to the common data scores set out by the pensions regulator, we have a pass mark for RBKC of 95.6%, which is an improvement on the 2019 score of 89.5%, so that's a 6.1% improvement. However, although that is the score that will be passed over to the pensions regulator as part of our statutory requirements, I think it's fair to say that it's fairly high level in terms of the data that's looked at. So you can see in section 3.4, I've listed there the areas which are covered by the common data scores. So you can see it's things like, for example, do we have national insurance number for everyone? Do we have a home address, a valid home address for everyone, and so on. So although we do have an improvement overall in the common data scores, I think it's fair to say that that is only high level. When you go further down to look at what we call the conditional data scores, which I haven't put here because there are many of them, what we find is that the pass mark overall for RBKC in terms of records that meet all the conditional data scores drops to 74.6%. Now that is still an improvement on last year. Last year in 2019, the pass mark was 74.3%, so there's been a minor improvement. I'm happy to forward on to members of the pension board the detailed report from Haywood's, but basically the conditional data scores look at more detailed information about individual records. So they look at, for example, whether all records have contributions data, whether all of the information for things like transfers in and transfer out is held, whether or not we've got information about dependent pensions, whether we have AVC details for people who are contributing to AVC funds and so on. So on those more detailed areas, RBKC scores lower. As I say, it's still an improvement on the previous year, but what it indicates is something that I think we've known for some time, which is that the state of some of the records held by Surrey that still needs further work. I'll come on to that a bit later as part of the data transfer, if I may. So I think the bottom line is on that area in terms of member data, gradual improvement, but still further work to do. Section 4, Undecided Leavers. So this has been something that we have been looking at for some time now. And when we first knew about the Undecided Leavers back in October 2019, there were 1,235 of those. So an undecided leaver is someone who no longer appears on a year-end report from an employer, but no leaver form has been received by Surrey. So they are undecided. In other words, we think they've left, but no leaver form has come in to confirm that the person's left. So in October 2019, Surrey advised us we had 1,235 of those cases. And I think board members will probably recollect that we did engage a full-time worker working here at RBKC to look at all of those cases, to gather the missing information and pass it back to Surrey so that those records could be corrected and amended. By this year, by August this year, that number had reduced down to 449 cases. So we had managed to progress a total of 786 with Surrey. Now, of those remaining 449 cases, all of the data has now been gathered for those and passed over to Surrey. And we've had a commitment from Surrey that they will be loading the missing information for those undecided leavers by the end of November. So we should know within the next 2 weeks or so, latest, whether there are any anomalies arising from those remaining undecided leaver records. I think it's fair to say that this has been a success story in terms of us working with Surrey to try and close the gap as far as undecided leaver records are concerned. However, I do expect that when we get the system transferred over to us next April, we will still have a number of undecided leaver records, new ones that have come in as a result of the 2020 data, year-end data exercise that we will still need to look at. So I think what this points to is that we have to be much more rigorous with external employers once we move to monthly data collection, in terms of making sure that we chase down missing information for people who've left. In terms of Section 5, casework management, so you can see from the table in Section 5.1 that we've gone through, we have fortnightly reports with Surrey to identify outstanding cases. This could be any type of case where work is required by Surrey to progress that case to a conclusion. And you can see that we currently have a total of 1,216 cases outstanding with Surrey where work is required to, in some form, to make sure that the member record is updated. What you can see in that table in section 5.1 is that a proportion of those cases go back to either 2015 or earlier. Now, normally we would expect at any one time there would be around 300 cases to be looked at, because that's for the size of the fund that we have, we would expect around 300 individual cases to be dealt with, covering any range of member data that requires some sort of action. So at the moment we are 3 times over that limit, I'd say. What we've agreed with Surrey is that they, between now and the end of March, they are going to look at all the cases that predate 2019 and either close them down if they haven't been closed down properly. In other words, there's no action required by Surrey, and they simply haven't been closed down properly by someone who was dealing with them in the past. Or alternatively, to close them down but create a new workflow task on the system so that it's now managed as a 2020/2021 case. So what I'm expecting as a result of that process is that we will probably reduce that 1,200 number by about 300 cases by 31st of March next year. That still leaves us with around 800 cases that will be outstanding at the point that we take control of the system. And we will be looking to put forward a program to reduce those cases significantly over the course of the next year. As you can see from the table in section 5.2, there are about 6 case types in total that account for over half of the total cases. So the highest one of those is deferred member processing, where someone has left and simply haven't done the work necessary to close the record down, to write to the member to confirm that they were a deferred member and so on. Section 6, the annual benefit statements and the annual allowance statements. So again, Pension Board will probably be aware that every year all active and deferred members have to get an annual benefit statement. You can see in paragraph 6.1, just on the top of page 4, that there were a total of 3,321 benefit statements issued to active members. 36 were not issued because they were queries from the UN file, so that's quite a low number. So I think it's fair to say that the annual benefit exercise was successful this year with Surrey. Of the deferred members, a total of 4,432 benefit statements were issued. 293 couldn't be issued because the member address was no longer deemed to be up to date. So of those queries that are outstanding, 36 UN queries, we have now resolved all of those, and that information has now gone to Surrey to update the member record. The 293 where the member address has gone away, we are engaging, as usual with Surrey, an annual process to do address tracing for those members to see if we can get the missing address from national records. Paragraph 6.3, annual allowance statements. So these are statements to scheme members who've exceeded the limit on the growth in their pension over the course of the last year, the capital value of their pension. It's a statutory requirement, so 82 scheme members in RBKC were issued with annual allowance statements on time by Surrey. So I think it's fair to say that the annual allowance and annual benefit statement processes that were worked on by Surrey this year, with some background support from us, were successful. The area where I think probably the most disappointing in terms of Surrey performance is in section 7. You can see we've got key performance indicators from Surrey. Board members will be aware that Surrey have never consistently hit 100% of their targets across all indicators. That's never happened. Since COVID in March and April this year, Surrey have reduced some of their capacity in terms of help desk resource, so that it's moved online. Almost all of the help desk resource is now online rather than by phone, and that has in some cases resulted in casework being dealt with beyond the target date. So Surrey in particular have told us that they've concentrated mostly on any casework that requires benefits to be paid to the member. So we're talking about death benefits, retirement estimates, and also transfers in and out where there's a high dependency on information coming in from external bodies to make sure member records are up to date. It's fair to say when looking at the data, the scores that are in the table in paragraph 7.1, I've shown the September 2020 scores here. Overall, a total of 28 cases out of 211 were dealt with late by Surrey, in other words, outside of the target date, which is a 13% failure rate. Ordinarily, the actual number of cases that's out of target is relatively low, but having said that, it's very disappointing and of concern that Surrey, that of those cases, 5 of them related to death benefits. Now, Surrey did assure us that they would make sure that all death benefits were processed within the target date, and they clearly haven't. So I have taken that up with them, and I'm waiting a response from them in terms of reasons why they have failed, particularly in death benefit cases, to progress cases within the key performance indicator. I haven't had a response back from them yet, but when I do, I'll make sure that I think we should take this forward at the next meeting as well, so that I can give you an update on that. So overall, I think the picture is one of slow improvements, but I think what's evident from the information is that there's still plenty of work for us to do when we take control of the service next year, in terms of making sure that we identify and rectify gaps and errors in member records. Any comments at all from anyone?
Just a question about death benefits. Does this refer, presumably this is mainly retired members dying and the benefits to their partners, rather than death in service?
That is correct, yes.
Right. Because I hope any death in service benefit would be dealt with extremely rapidly. The other question was concerning this problem of people, deferred members who you lose touch with. I think we will also, one problem is going to be people who move abroad, and they may be quite difficult to track down. Do we, when people leave, impress upon them the importance of keeping the pension administrator in touch, as ourselves now, with any change of address? That's unless, of course, they transfer to another public sector pension scheme. But then,
the members are told that they should update and keep the pension administrator up to date with their home address. I think one of the key things that's happened within the last 2 years is with member self-service, is that members can actually log into their own record in the pensions administration system from anywhere in the world, so long as they actually have already registered to use it. And they can update their own home address on the pensions administration system remotely via member self-service. They don't have to write in to do that. So we recently did some work with Surrey to look at the number of active and deferred members and pensioners who use self-service, and it's evident that overall the number of deferred members using self-service is still relatively low. No more than about 30% of deferred members are actually using self-service. So I think it's fair to say that we need to do more, I think, once we take over the service next year, in terms of trying to make sure that we contact deferred members in particular, where that seems to be more of an issue, to make sure that they register for using self-service and they know that they can keep their own home address information up to date. For people who move abroad, as you say, it's much more difficult to obtain up-to-date address information, which is why we are particularly keen on increasing the numbers of people who use the self-service option, because then they can automatically update their own address.
Yes, I'm perhaps slightly sceptical as to the success you're going to have in getting a large number of people to do this. I say I think it's just so important to impress on people, particularly perhaps those who've only worked for a few years with the council, who are not going into another public sector job, the importance of keeping us in touch, because otherwise their pension is at risk. You might not get it if we can't get in touch with you. And I think if they realise they have a financial interest in doing so, they will do so.
Yes, one of the things that we do, I think you're right about that. One of the things that does happen at the moment is that where annual benefit statements are sent out on paper to some members where they haven't elected to use the electronic versions, then what happens is when they come back to Surrey, because they marked as gone away, then those individuals are included in the annual address tracing exercise that occurs within the UK. So there is a mechanism for UK-based gone away members to have their address traced, but clearly at the moment we don't really have that mechanism for people who live abroad.
Thank you very much. Other members' questions? No. If there are no questions, we perhaps go on to the related matter of the exit from Surrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the report, item A12, is a progress update on the transfer of the Pension Administration Service from Surrey County Council. At the last meeting of the Pension Board, I reported detail, I think, on how we were intending to transfer the service over from Surrey by 1st of April next year. This report basically confirms that we're on target to achieve that transfer date. And so far, we've made good progress in making sure that we are on target to transfer the whole service. So section 2.2 lists the key achievements so far. So in brief, they can be summarised as the fact that we've agreed a detailed exit plan with Surrey, covering all aspects of the project, which includes governance arrangements, the fact that we have fortnightly meetings with Surrey in terms of a project board and a monthly governance board meeting as well that considers all aspects of the project. We've agreed a full project plan with Surrey in terms of all the activities that need to be done between now and really end of April next year, because there'll still be some tasks to be done in April. Detailed in terms of timescale and events, and so that's reviewed regularly every week with Surrey. We've dedicated staffing resources at Surrey and here to make sure that the project occurs on time. We've signed off a 5-year contract with Hayward, the current software supplier, to supply the software service from next April. We've also transferred the first data transfer of scheme member data has occurred. It's just finished last week and was successful. It's a test data transfer covering about 27,000 records, and also we've just today we've had the first of our staff training sessions, so they're taking place in half-day sessions for the next 4 weeks. And finally, also, I think we've agreed in principle with Surrey that there will be no TUPE transfer implications, which was a key concern I think that we had at the last time we met. So there's been a lot that's been achieved between the last meeting and today. Having said that, of course, there's still plenty more to do. So that's covered in section 2.3. I've broken that down for you in terms of just the each month between now and really next April, what the key things are that we need to do. The most important things are listed here. So as you can see, in December, we have to complete the staff training, agree what we consider to be letter templates, so standard letters that will go out to members covering all aspects of pension administration, and then finalise and hopefully agree our arrangements with third parties such as HMRC, the NI Contributions Office for Data Exchange. And set up or at least agree with our finance colleagues, the process of setting up BACS arrangements to pay pensioners each month. In January, we'll be doing further test date migrations with Hayward, the software supplier, and we'll be commencing the first of 3 parallel runs on the pensioner payroll. There'll be user acceptance testing of the software, and also we will start to agree the self-service software setup with Hayward, which will look almost identical to the current software self-service setup that Surrey have. February and March is really just completion of user acceptance testing and parallel running. And then in April, subject to confirmation by the governance board and the pension board that we're okay to go live, then 1st of April or just after the 1st of April, we turn on the system and go live. And then as soon as we get into April, we've got some key tasks, which will be the application of the annual pensions increase for pensioners, and make sure that we have sufficient communications in place with all scheme members to let them know that we're now running the service, and where they have to go to get information or log on to self-service, for example. And then finally, the deletion of all of our data from Surrey systems at the end of April next year. So think it's fair to say at the moment that we're on target to achieve the transfer date. There are no showstoppers so far, but obviously we're keeping it under fortnightly review through the pension operational board, as we call it. And then finally, in paragraph 2.5 on page 3, I've just mentioned that alongside this, we are transferring the service, the retained service for Hammersmith back to Hammersmith by 31st December. We've already made significant progress in disaggregating all of our archive records between the RB Casing and Surrey. We've agreed a transfer date of all archived data of 21st of December to send all of our emails and archive data over to Hammersmith. I've met with their new pension manager 4 times now to go through the transfer plans, and I think it's fair to say again that that will also occur on target.
Thank you. Right. Thank you very much. I don't think I have any questions. Other members? No.
Just one quick question, Chairman. Annual pensions increase. The Chancellor has announced that we're going to go to the lower of the indices, which I think is going to be RPI. Is that correct? And does that apply to our scheme?
At the moment, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to tell you whether that's the case or not. I don't have enough information to know whether that would be the case. Normally, yes, I'm sorry. I wouldn't be able to answer that question for you. I'd have to come back to you on that.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that.
Any other questions? Right. Thank you very much. And then, of course, we now move on to A13. Anyone would like to introduce the paper on Mercer? Now, this was something that went to and was discussed, and including a Part B discussion at the Investment Committee. So if somebody would like to briefly comment on this.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This was the contract with Mercer, which has reached a break, and there is an option for the Investment Committee to approve a 2-year enhancement to that contract. So it's a 3+2 scenario. We've aligned, as officers, we've aligned the report with the requirement by the Competition Markets Authority to, firstly, to set objectives for investment consultants, and then secondly, to look at progress that's been achieved in that particular year. So in the appendix to the report, Chairman, you can see the officers' appraisals of the work that's been done by Mercer, which has been judged as, in the majority of cases, being of excellent standard. And it was the officer's recommendation that the 2-year enhancement being granted to the Mercer contract. So that has been approved, and it's for the Executive Director for Finance and Assets to sign that extension.
Yes, I mean, I said to the Investment Committee that I thought that it was important that the Investment Committee challenges the advice of the investment consultant, because I think there's a risk of groupthink amongst the community of investment consultants, and I told them I think that they do that. I think they're good at that. Okay. Any further questions? Right, I think that concludes the public part of the agenda. I would remind members that there's a further member training session coming up beginning of next month, and that some of us attended the previous session where we were shown a slide from the actuaries which showed that in fact the fund has done rather well in the past since in the past 9 months since the disruption caused by the pandemic. So that was encouraging. So we'll leave it to, we'll just break for a couple of minutes, and then I think Tom will see that anyone who is not